The morning mist clung to the forest floor like ghostly fingers as Marcus Chen adjusted his reconnaissance pack one final time. His breath formed small clouds in the crisp air as he checked his equipment. Plasma rifle, emergency beacon, field rations for 3 days, and the specialized tracking gear that made him the best scout in the Terran Colonial Defense Force. "Remember, Chen," Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through his comm unit, "this is strictly reconnaissance. The Cathara have been moving through Sector 7, and we've lost contact with the Henderson family's homestead. Find out what happened to them, gather intel on enemy movements, and get back here. No heroics." Marcus touched the transmit button on his collar. "Understood, Captain. Radio silence until I return or encounter immediate threat." The forest around him seemed peaceful enough. Tall bluebark trees stretched toward the pale yellow sky of Kepler 442b, their leaves rustling gently in the morning breeze. Bird-like creatures called from the canopy above, their songs mixing with the distant sound of running water. It was hard to believe that somewhere in this tranquil wilderness, an alien force was hunting human colonists. The Henderson homestead sat 15 kilometers northeast of Firebase Bravo, nestled in a valley that had been chosen for its natural defenses and rich soil. Tom Henderson had been a veteran of the Mars campaigns before retiring to this frontier world with his wife Sarah and their 8-year-old twin daughters, Emma and Lucy. They'd built a good life here, raising crops and livestock, contributing to the growing human presence on this world. Marcus moved through the forest with practiced stealth, his enhanced military training allowing him to navigate the terrain without disturbing the natural rhythm of the woods. Every few hundred meters, he paused to listen and observe, checking for signs of Cathara passage. The alien species were known for their hunting prowess and their particular hatred of human expansion into what they considered their territory. The first sign of trouble came 3 hours into his trek. Marcus knelt beside a stream and found deep gouges in the soft earth along the bank. The marks were unmistakable Cathara claws, each as long as a human finger and sharp enough to cut through steel. The tracks were fresh, no more than a day old, and they headed directly toward the Henderson homestead. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. The Cathara typically traveled in hunting packs of 6 to 8 individuals, each standing nearly 3 meters tall with muscular reptilian bodies covered in thick scales. They were faster than humans, stronger than humans, and their natural weapons could tear through standard body armor like paper. Worse yet, they were intelligent, capable of complex tactics and ambush strategies. Following the stream, Marcus continued toward the homestead, moving even more carefully now. The forest began to show more signs of disturbance, broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, and the occasional claw mark on tree bark. The Cathara weren't trying to hide their passage, which meant either they were supremely confident or they wanted to be followed. Neither possibility was encouraging. As he crested a small ridge overlooking the Henderson Valley, Marcus felt his blood run cold. Smoke rose from where the main house should have been, and even from this distance, he could see the blackened remains of what had once been a thriving homestead. The barn was gone, reduced to charred timber and ash. The equipment shed had been torn apart as if by massive hands, and scattered around the property were the remains of livestock, their bodies left where they had fallen. Marcus activated his long-range scope and surveyed the destruction below. The main house was a total loss, its walls collapsed and still smoldering. The family's hover truck sat overturned near the driveway, its metal frame twisted and punctured by what could only be Cathara claws. There was no sign of human bodies, which could mean the family had escaped or... A movement near the tree line caught his attention. Marcus adjusted his scope and felt his breath catch. A lone Cathara warrior stood among the trees, its massive frame perfectly still as it surveyed the destruction. The creature's scales were a deep green-black, and its elongated head turned slowly back and forth as if searching for something. After several minutes, the alien moved deeper into the forest and disappeared from view. Marcus waited another 30 minutes before beginning his careful descent into the valley. He approached the homestead from the west, using the destroyed barn as cover while he searched for any clues about the Henderson family's fate. The attack had been thorough and brutal, but as he moved through the debris, he began to notice something strange. There were signs of resistance. Plasma burns on several trees indicated that at least one human weapon had been fired. Empty ammunition casings lay scattered near what had been the house's back door, suggesting a fighting retreat rather than a complete surprise attack. Most telling of all, there were only 4 distinct sets of Cathara tracks around the property, not the 6 to 8 he would expect from a hunting pack. Marcus made his way to the ruins of the main house, stepping carefully through the debris. The Cathara had been thorough in their destruction, but they had also been searching for something. Furniture had been torn apart rather than simply destroyed, and storage areas had been systematically ransacked. This wasn't just a random attack. The aliens had been looking for something specific. In what remained of the kitchen, Marcus found a partially burned family photograph. The Henderson family stood together in front of their new home, smiling at the camera. Tom Henderson's arm was around his wife's shoulders, while the twin girls grinned gap-toothed at whoever was taking the picture. They looked happy and proud of their new life on this frontier world. A sound from outside made Marcus freeze. Heavy footsteps were approaching the house, too measured and deliberate to be human. He quickly moved to what had been a window and peered out through the rubble. Another Cathara warrior was approaching, this one smaller than the first but moving with the same predatory grace. It paused near the overturned hover truck and lifted its massive head, nostrils flaring as it tested the air. Marcus held his breath and remained perfectly still. The alien's sense of smell was reportedly acute, and any movement or foreign scent could give away his position. The Cathara moved closer to the house, its clawed feet making soft, scraping sounds on the debris-covered ground. For several terrifying minutes, it searched the area around the house, occasionally stopping to examine something more closely. Finally, the creature seemed satisfied and moved away, heading toward the northern tree line. Marcus waited until it was completely out of sight before allowing himself to breathe normally again. He needed to complete his reconnaissance and return to base with his findings, but something about the scene didn't add up. The attack pattern, the thorough searching, the fact that no human bodies had been found, it all suggested that this wasn't a typical Cathara raid. Moving more quickly now, Marcus searched the rest of the property for clues. In the debris near what had been the children's bedroom, he found something that made his heart race. A child's drawing, partially burned but still recognizable, showed stick figures of a family standing next to what looked like a cave or tunnel entrance. At the bottom of the page, in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "Our secret place." Marcus studied the drawing more carefully. The cave entrance was depicted near what looked like a large boulder or rock formation, and there were trees around it that matched the species growing on the hillside behind the homestead. If the Henderson children had known about a hiding place, it was possible that some or all of the family had escaped the initial attack. The thought energized him, but it also presented a dilemma. His orders were clear: gather intelligence and return to base. But if there were survivors hiding somewhere in these hills, he couldn't just abandon them. The Cathara were still in the area, and any humans caught in the open would be easy prey for the alien hunters. Marcus made his decision. He would conduct a quick search of the likely hiding spots before beginning his return journey. If he found nothing, he would head back to Firebase Bravo with his intelligence about the attack. If he found survivors, he would have to figure out how to get them to safety. Using the drawing as a guide, Marcus began searching the hillside behind the destroyed homestead. The terrain was rocky and heavily wooded, with numerous formations that could conceal a cave entrance. He moved systematically, checking each promising location while keeping alert for signs of Cathara activity. After 2 hours of searching, he was beginning to think the drawing had been pure imagination when he spotted something that made him pause. Behind a cluster of blue-bark trees, partially hidden by hanging moss and undergrowth, was a dark opening in the hillside. It was small, barely large enough for an adult to crawl through, but it matched the cave entrance in the child's drawing. Marcus approached carefully, listening for any sounds from within the cave. As he drew closer, he could see that the entrance had been recently disturbed. Small branches and leaves had been arranged to better conceal the opening, and there were faint scuff marks in the soil that could have been made by humans. "Hello," he called softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Marcus Chen. I'm with the Terran Colonial Defense Force. If anyone is in there, I'm here to help." For a long moment, there was no response. Then, from deep within the cave, came the faintest sound of movement. Marcus felt his heart rate increase as he waited, hopping against hope that he had found the Henderson family alive. "Please," he called again, slightly louder. "I know about the attack on your home. I'm here to get you to safety." This time the response was unmistakable. A child's voice, thin and frightened, echoed from the darkness. "Mama, someone's here." Marcus felt a surge of relief and determination. They were alive, at least some of them. But his relief was tempered by the knowledge that getting them to safety would be far more dangerous than simply returning to base alone. The Cathara were still active in the area, and traveling with civilians, especially children, would slow him down considerably. "Sarah Henderson," he called into the cave, using the mother's name from the intelligence briefing. "This is Sergeant Chen with the Colonial Defense Force. I'm coming in to talk to you." Marcus set his rifle to easy reach and began crawling through the narrow entrance. The tunnel was longer than he had expected, sloping downward into the hillside for several meters before opening into a larger chamber. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he could make out shapes huddled against the far wall of the cave. There were 4 figures, 1 adult and 3 children. Marcus frowned, confused. According to his briefing, the Henderson family consisted of 4 people, 2 parents and twin daughters. But the adult figure appeared to be female, and there were 3 children instead of 2. "Mrs. Henderson?" he asked softly as he approached the group. The adult figure lifted her head, and Marcus could see it was indeed Sarah Henderson, though she looked exhausted and frightened. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and there was a makeshift bandage around her left arm. But her eyes were alert and determined as she positioned herself protectively in front of the children. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse but steady. "Sergeant Marcus Chen, Terran Colonial Defense Force," he repeated, slowly removing his helmet so she could see his face. "I was sent to investigate when your homestead went dark. Are you injured? Where is your husband?" Sarah's face crumpled for a moment before she regained her composure. "Tom didn't make it out. He stayed behind to give us time to reach the cave." Her voice broke slightly on the last words. Marcus felt a stab of sympathy for the widow, but he forced himself to focus on the immediate situation. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Henderson. Right now, I need to get you and the children to safety. The Cathara are still active in this area." "The children," Sarah said, glancing back at the 3 small figures behind her. "Emma and Lucy are mine, but—" She paused, seeming to struggle with something. Marcus looked more carefully at the 3rd child, who appeared to be slightly older than the twins and had distinctly different features. As his eyes adjusted further to the darkness, he realized with shock that the 3rd child's skin had a faint greenish tint, and there were small scales visible along the sides of her neck. "She's not human," Sarah said quietly, answering the question in his eyes. "We found her 3 days ago, injured and alone near the stream. She was hiding from her own kind." Marcus stared at the alien child, his mind racing. Everything he had been taught about the Cathara painted them as implacable enemies of humanity, ruthless predators who showed no mercy to human colonists. But here was a Cathara child, apparently seeking protection from humans, and a human family had risked their lives to save her. The alien child looked back at him with large, dark eyes that seemed far too mature for her apparent age. When she spoke, her voice was soft and strangely melodic, with an accent unlike anything Marcus had ever heard. "The hunters come for me," she said in carefully pronounced English. "The soft skins hide me from the hunters. I am grateful." Sarah placed a protective hand on the alien child's shoulder. "Her name is Zara. She's been teaching my girls words in her language while they taught her ours. When the attack came, she helped guide us to this cave. She saved our lives." Marcus felt his worldview shifting as he processed this information. The Cathara attack on the homestead hadn't been a random raid against human colonists. They had been hunting one of their own, a child who had somehow ended up in the care of a human family. "Mrs. Henderson," he said carefully, "this complicates things considerably if the Cathara are hunting her specifically." "Then we protect her," Sarah interrupted firmly. "She's just a child, Sergeant. Whatever her people have done, she hasn't done anything wrong. She's been nothing but kind to my daughters, and she helped save their lives." Marcus looked at the 3 children huddled together in the cave. The human twins, Emma and Lucy, sat on either side of the young Cathara, their small hands clasped with hers in a gesture of friendship that transcended species. Despite everything he had been taught about the alien threat, he couldn't see anything dangerous about the scared child before him. "How long have you been hiding here?" he asked. 2 days, Sarah replied. "We've been taking turns keeping watch, and Zara has been listening for sounds that might mean her people are getting close. She can hear things we can't." As if summoned by the mention of her enhanced senses, the alien child suddenly tensed and lifted her head. Her nostrils flared slightly, and her dark eyes grew wide with fear. "They come," she whispered urgently. "The hunters approach this place. We must go deeper." Marcus grabbed his rifle and crawled quickly to the cave entrance. Through the narrow opening, he could see movement in the forest beyond. At least 3 Cathara warriors were moving through the trees, their massive forms gliding between the trunks with predatory grace. They were clearly following some kind of trail, and their path was leading them directly toward the cave. He crawled back to the others, his mind racing through their options. The cave appeared to extend deeper into the hillside, but he had no idea where it led or if there were other exits. Fighting was out of the question. Even with his military training and equipment, 3 Cathara warriors would overwhelm him quickly, and he had civilians to protect. "Is there another way out of here?" he asked Sarah urgently. "We don't know," she admitted. "We've only explored the first chamber. The cave goes back further, but it's completely dark." Zara spoke up, her young voice steady despite her obvious fear. "In the deep places, sometimes there are other openings. My people sometimes use cave systems for hunting paths." It wasn't much, but it was their only option. Marcus quickly gathered the group together and began leading them deeper into the cave system. Using his tactical light on its lowest setting, he illuminated the path ahead while trying to avoid creating too much visible light that might give away their position. The cave tunnel continued downward, branching occasionally into side passages that disappeared into darkness. The air grew cooler as they descended, and Marcus could hear the sound of running water somewhere ahead. Behind them, the faint sounds of the Cathara search party grew closer to the entrance. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, they reached a larger chamber with multiple exits. The sound of water was stronger here, and Marcus could feel a slight breeze coming from one of the passages that suggested it might lead to another opening. "This way," he decided, choosing the passage with the air current. "Stay close and keep quiet." As they made their way through the twisting tunnel, Marcus found himself constantly glancing back at the alien child who had unknowingly brought so much danger to the Henderson family. Yet he couldn't bring himself to see her as an enemy. She moved carefully to avoid making noise, helped steady the younger children when the path became difficult, and constantly listened for sounds of pursuit with an attention that spoke of long experience with being hunted. The tunnel eventually began to slope upward, and the sound of running water grew stronger. Finally, after another 20 minutes of careful progress, they emerged into daylight near a small waterfall that cascaded down the hillside. They were perhaps a kilometer from the original cave entrance, hidden in a narrow valley that was well concealed from the main forest. Marcus checked his chronometer and felt his heart sink. The sun was already beginning to set, and they were still 15 kilometers from Firebase Bravo. Traveling at night with civilians would be extremely dangerous, especially with Cathara hunters active in the area. But staying in the open was equally risky. "Sergeant," Sarah said quietly, "Zara says the hunters will search all night. They can see in the dark better than we can." Marcus nodded grimly. He had been afraid of that. The Cathara had excellent night vision, giving them a significant advantage in darkness. But perhaps that same advantage could be turned against them. "How well does she know their hunting patterns?" he asked, looking at the young alien. Zara stepped forward, her scaled features serious beyond her years. "The hunters move in cycles. They search an area completely, then move to the next. If we can avoid them until they pass, we might have time to reach your people." It was a slim hope, but it was better than trying to fight their way through. Marcus made his decision. They would wait until full darkness, then attempt to circle around the search area and reach Firebase Bravo. It would be dangerous, but it was their best chance. As they settled in to wait for nightfall, Marcus watched the unlikely group that had formed around the young Cathara. Sarah Henderson had lost her husband and her home, but she remained determined to protect all 3 children under her care. Emma and Lucy, despite their fear and exhaustion, stayed close to their alien friend, sharing their small store of food and offering what comfort they could. And Zara herself, barely more than a child, bore the weight of knowing that her mere presence had brought death and destruction to the family that had shown her kindness. Yet she remained brave, using her enhanced senses to help keep them all safe while struggling with concepts of loyalty and belonging that would have challenged an adult. As darkness fell over the forest, Marcus prepared for what would likely be the most dangerous night of his military career. Somewhere in the darkness, alien hunters searched for their prey, and he was responsible for getting all 4 survivors safely home. The forest at night was a different world entirely. What had seemed peaceful and welcoming during the day now felt alien and threatening. Strange sounds echoed through the darkness. The calls of nocturnal creatures, the rustle of wind through leaves, and underneath it all, the occasional distant roar of a Cathara hunter calling to its packmates. Marcus crouched beside the small group of survivors, studying his tactical display in the dim red glow of his night vision equipment. The route back to Firebase Bravo was clearly marked, but the path would take them through several areas where the Cathara had been active. He needed to find an alternative route that would keep them away from the main hunting grounds while still getting them to safety. "Zara," he whispered to the young alien, "can you tell me more about how your people hunt? What patterns do they follow?" The Cathara child tilted her head thoughtfully, her large, dark eyes reflecting the faint starlight. "The pack hunters work in groups of 4 or 6. They make a wide circle around their target area, then slowly close it. But they do not like the water places. The flowing water hides scent trails." Marcus nodded, filing away this crucial information. If the Cathara avoided water, then following the stream system might give them a safer route home. It would be more difficult terrain, especially for the children, but it could keep them hidden from the hunters. Sarah Henderson sat with her arms around her twin daughters, Emma and Lucy. The girls had been remarkably brave throughout their ordeal, but Marcus could see the strain in their young faces. They were exhausted, frightened, and struggling to understand why their peaceful world had suddenly become so dangerous. "How are you holding up?" Marcus asked Sarah quietly. She gave him a tired but determined look. "We're managing. The girls are strong, they take after their father." Her voice caught slightly on the last words, but she maintained her composure. "Zara has been amazing with them. She's been teaching them games to keep their minds off what's happening." Marcus glanced at the unusual group. Despite the species difference and the dangerous circumstances, the 3 children had formed a tight bond. Emma and Lucy stayed close to their new friend, while Zara seemed to take her role as protector seriously, constantly listening for danger and offering comfort when the younger girls became frightened. "Mrs. Henderson," Marcus said carefully, "I need to ask you about Zara. How exactly did you find her? And do you have any idea why her own people are hunting her?" Sarah's expression grew troubled. "Tom found her 3 days ago when he was checking the fence line near the south pasture. She was hurt, had some kind of burn mark on her arm, and was half-starved. She was terrified at first, but when she saw that we meant her no harm, she calmed down." "Did she tell you anything about why she was alone?" "Her English wasn't as good then, but we gathered that she had run away from something. She kept saying, 'not like them,' and 'different thinking.' Tom thought maybe she was from some kind of religious sect or political group that her family disagreed with." Marcus frowned. The idea of Cathara having internal conflicts was new to him. All the intelligence reports painted them as a unified species with a single purpose, expanding their territory and eliminating human colonists. But if there were factions among them, if some Cathara disagreed with the war against humanity, it could change everything. "Zara," he said, turning to address the young alien directly, "can you tell me why the hunters are looking for you? Why did you run away from your people?" The child was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with difficult concepts and the limitations of her still-developing English vocabulary. When she finally spoke, her words were carefully chosen. "My clutch mother and father, they say humans are meat creatures, not real thinking, must be hunted like animals." She paused, her dark eyes reflecting deep pain. "But I see human cubs playing near the water. They laugh and learn and care for each other. Same as Cathara cubs, same as me." Sarah reached out and gently touched the alien child's scaled hand. "You question what your parents taught you." "Yes," Zara said, her voice growing stronger. "I speak this to the clutch leaders. I say maybe humans and Cathara can live in same place without hunting. They say I am sick thinking. They say I must be fixed." She struggled with the last word, clearly translating a concept that didn't have a direct equivalent in English. Marcus felt a chill as he understood the implication. They wanted to change how you think, brainwashing or some kind of mental conditioning. "I run away before the fixing time," Zara continued. "I hide in the wild places for many days, then the soft-skins find me and give me food and safety." She looked at Emma and Lucy with obvious affection. "These little ones teach me that my thinking is not sick. They teach me that different peoples can be friends." The profound implications of what Zara was saying began to sink in. If there were Cathara who questioned their species' aggressive stance toward humanity, it suggested that the war between their peoples might not be as inevitable as everyone believed. But it also meant that Zara represented something incredibly dangerous to the Cathara leadership, proof that their fundamental beliefs about human inferiority might be wrong. A distant sound made them all freeze. Somewhere in the forest, a Cathara hunter was calling to its packmates, the deep, resonant roar echoing through the trees. Zara immediately tensed, her head turning to track the sound with predatory precision. "They are moving toward the cave place," she whispered urgently. "They found our first hiding spot." Marcus quickly checked his equipment and helped the group prepare to move. They would follow his planned route along the stream system, traveling quietly through the water to mask their scent trail. It would be slow going with the children, but it was their best chance of avoiding the hunting packs. "Remember," he told them quietly as they prepared to leave their hiding spot, "stay close together, move as quietly as possible, and stop immediately if I give the signal. Zara, I need you to listen for any sounds that might indicate hunters nearby." The young Cathara nodded solemnly. "I will keep the cubs safe," she promised, using what Marcus realized was her people's term for children of any species. They made their way down to the stream that ran through the narrow valley. The water was cold and moved swiftly over smooth stones, creating a constant gentle sound that would help mask any noise they made. Marcus took the lead, using his night vision equipment to navigate while the others followed single file behind him. Progress was slow and difficult. The streambed was uneven, with slippery rocks and occasional deeper pools that required careful navigation. Emma and Lucy struggled with the cold water and the unfamiliar terrain, but they pressed on without complaint, holding tightly to Zara's scaled hands as she helped guide them through the more challenging sections. After an hour of travel, they reached a point where the stream joined a larger waterway that flowed generally in the direction of Firebase Bravo. Marcus called a brief halt to check their position and allow everyone to rest. They had covered perhaps 2 kilometers, which put them roughly a third of the way to safety. "How are you doing?" he asked Sarah, who was breathing heavily from the exertion. "I'm fine," she replied, though he could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "The girls are being incredibly brave. I'm proud of them." "And I'm proud of you," Marcus said sincerely. "Not many people would have taken in an alien child, especially under these circumstances." Sarah looked over at Zara, who was quietly helping Emma and Lucy adjust their wet clothing to stay warmer. "She's just a child who needed help. When I see her with my daughters, I can't think of her as anything else." Marcus was about to respond when Zara suddenly held up a scaled hand for silence. Her large ears, which he now noticed were more prominent than a human's, swiveled slightly as she focused on some distant sound. After several tense seconds, she relaxed slightly but kept her voice to the barest whisper. "Hunters pass by the high ground, moving away from water toward the burned place. We are safe for now but must keep moving." They resumed their journey along the stream, moving as quietly as possible through the flowing water. The larger waterway was deeper and faster than the smaller tributary they had started in, requiring them to move more carefully to avoid being swept off their feet by the current. As they traveled, Marcus found himself watching Zara with growing fascination. Despite her youth, she demonstrated remarkable survival skills and situational awareness. She seemed to know instinctively where to step to avoid loose rocks, how to move through the water without creating splashes, and when to pause to listen for potential threats. "How old are you, Zara?" he asked during one of their brief rest stops. The alien child considered the question carefully. "In Cathara seasons, I am 8 cycles, but my people grow fast when young, slow when older. I think same age as Emma and Lucy in thinking time." 8 years old. Marcus shook his head in amazement. This child had survived on her own in the wilderness for days, escaped from her own people because she disagreed with their fundamental beliefs about humans, and was now helping guide a group of refugees to safety. The courage and maturity she displayed would have been impressive in an adult, let alone a child. "Zara," Emma whispered during one of their stops, "when we get to the safe place, will you stay with us?" The young Cathara's expression grew sad. "I do not know, little cub. Your people might not want me, and my people will keep hunting me if they know where I am." "But you're our friend," Lucy added firmly. "Friends stay together." "I want to stay," Zara admitted quietly. "But sometimes wanting and doing are different things." Sarah reached out and gently squeezed the alien child's shoulder. "We'll figure it out," she promised. "You saved our lives, Zara. We won't abandon you." They continued their journey through the night, following the winding course of the stream as it gradually turned toward their destination. The terrain began to change as they moved closer to Firebase Bravo, becoming less densely forested and more open. This meant they would have less cover, but it also meant they were getting closer to areas patrolled by human forces. Around midnight, they reached a point where the stream passed under a small bridge that carried one of the maintenance roads leading to the firebase. Marcus called a halt and climbed carefully up the bank to reconnoiter their position. According to his GPS, they were now only 5 kilometers from safety. As he studied the terrain ahead, Marcus noticed lights moving in the distance. Vehicle headlights, traveling in formation along the main road. A patrol returning to base, most likely, which meant they were now close enough to potentially signal for help if necessary. He was about to return to the others when Zara appeared beside him, moving with such stealth that he hadn't heard her approach despite his enhanced hearing equipment. "Danger ahead," she whispered urgently, pointing toward a patch of forest between their position and the firebase. "Hunters wait in the tree shadows, 3 of them, maybe more." Marcus activated his long-range scanner and carefully swept the area Zara had indicated. At first, he saw nothing, but then a slight movement caught his attention. A large shape shifted between the trees, too large and too deliberately positioned to be anything other than a Cathara warrior. "How did you know they were there?" he asked in amazement. "Scent carries on the wind, and they make small sounds when they breathe. Very quiet, but I hear them." Marcus felt a surge of respect for the young alien's abilities. His military equipment hadn't detected the ambush, but her natural senses had picked up the hunters immediately. Without her warning, they would have walked directly into a trap. "Can you tell how many there are?" Zara listened carefully, her scaled head tilted at an angle that suggested deep concentration. "3 for certain. Maybe one more, but that one stays very still. They wait for something or someone to come from the water path." The implications were troubling. If the Cathara had figured out that their quarry was following the stream system, they could have set ambushes at multiple points along the route. This might not be the only trap waiting between them and safety. Marcus quickly returned to the others and explained the situation. They would need to find an alternate route that avoided the main waterway while still getting them to Firebase Bravo. Looking at his tactical display, he identified a possible path that would take them through more difficult terrain, but might allow them to bypass the Cathara ambush. "It's going to be rough," he warned them. "We'll be traveling over open ground for part of the way, and there are some steep hills to climb, but if we can get past this ambush point, we should have a clear run to the base." Sarah nodded determinedly. "We've come this far, we can make it the rest of the way." They left the relative safety of the stream and began making their way across more challenging terrain. The landscape here was rockier, with numerous outcroppings and ravines that provided some concealment but made travel much more difficult. Emma and Lucy struggled with the rough ground, but Zara stayed close to them, offering her scaled hand when they needed help climbing over obstacles. As they moved through the darkness, Marcus found himself thinking about the larger implications of their situation. If Zara was telling the truth about other Cathara who questioned their species' hostility toward humans, it could represent an opportunity for peace that no one had previously imagined. But it also raised difficult questions about what would happen to her when they reached Firebase Bravo. Military protocol would require him to report the presence of an alien refugee, and his superiors would certainly want to interrogate her for intelligence about Cathara society and military capabilities. The idea of subjecting a child to that kind of treatment disturbed him, but he wasn't sure what alternatives existed. "Sergeant," Sarah said quietly as they paused to rest in a small ravine, "what's going to happen to Zara when we reach your base?" Marcus had been dreading that question. "I don't know," he admitted. "This is an unprecedented situation. My superiors will need to make decisions about how to handle it." "She's not a prisoner," Sarah said firmly. "She's a refugee who helped save human lives. That should count for something." "It will," Marcus assured her. "I'll make sure everyone understands that she chose to protect human civilians at great risk to herself. That kind of courage deserves recognition, not imprisonment." Zara, who had been listening to the conversation, spoke up quietly. "If your people decide I am too dangerous to keep, I understand. I will go back to the wild places and live alone." "No," Emma said firmly, surprising everyone with the strength in her young voice. You're not going anywhere without us. We're family now. Lucy nodded in agreement. Mama said that family means we protect each other no matter what. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she looked at her daughters. Despite everything they had been through, losing their father, their home, and nearly their lives, they had found room in their hearts to embrace an alien child as their sister. It was exactly the kind of compassion and courage that Tom would have been proud of. "That's right," she said, pulling all three children into a protective embrace. "We're family now, all of us, and families stick together." Marcus watched the touching scene and felt his own resolve strengthen. Whatever happened when they reached Firebase Bravo, he would make sure that Zara's courage and the Henderson family's compassion were recognized and protected. The young Cathara had already proven that the assumptions both species held about each other might be dangerously wrong. They resumed their journey through the rough terrain, climbing steadily toward a ridge that would give them a view of Firebase Bravo. The physical exertion was taking its toll on all of them, but especially on the children. Emma and Lucy were breathing heavily and struggling to keep up, while even Zara, despite her alien physiology, was showing signs of exhaustion. "How much farther?" Sarah asked during one of their brief rest stops. Marcus checked his position. "About 2 kilometers. Once we get over this ridge, we should be able to see the base lights." As if summoned by his words, a distant sound echoed across the landscape, the unmistakable whine of human plasma weapons being fired. All of them froze as they heard the sound repeated several more times, followed by the deeper, more ominous roar of Cathara energy weapons responding. "There's a firefight near the base," Marcus said grimly. "The hunters may have found other targets." Zara's expression grew troubled as she listened to the distant sounds of battle. "The pack leaders call for all hunters to gather. Something important happens at the human place." Marcus felt his stomach clench with worry. If the Cathara were mounting an attack on Firebase Bravo, it could mean that his small group was walking into an even more dangerous situation than he had realized. But they had no choice. The base was still their best hope for safety, and there might be wounded soldiers who needed help. "We keep going," he decided, "but we move fast and stay alert. If the base is under attack, we may need to help defend it." As they crested the ridge and looked down toward Firebase Bravo, Marcus felt his blood run cold. The military installation was clearly visible in the distance, its defensive lights blazing in the darkness. But surrounding the base were dozens of moving shadows, a Cathara force much larger than anything the intelligence reports had suggested was possible. The hunters hadn't just been looking for one alien child. They had been gathering for a major assault on the human presence in this sector. And now Marcus found himself responsible for getting 4 civilians to safety in the middle of what was shaping up to be the largest battle this world had ever seen. The view from the ridge revealed a scene that Marcus had only encountered in his worst nightmares. Firebase Bravo, which should have been a beacon of safety in the wilderness, was completely surrounded by Cathara forces. The aliens had positioned themselves in a wide circle around the human installation, using the natural terrain to create overlapping fields of fire that would make any escape attempt suicidal. Plasma bolts streaked through the darkness as the base's automated defense systems engaged multiple targets simultaneously. The distinctive whine of human energy weapons mixed with the deeper, more resonant sound of Cathara weapons, creating a deadly symphony that echoed across the landscape. Occasionally, the brilliant flash of an explosion would illuminate the battlefield, revealing glimpses of the massive alien warriors as they maneuvered through the rocks and trees. "How many of them are there?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of battle. Marcus activated his tactical scope and began counting the heat signatures surrounding the base. What he saw made his stomach turn. "At least 60, maybe more. This isn't just a hunting pack, it's a full military assault." Zara crouched beside him, her large, dark eyes fixed on the battle below. Her expression was troubled, and Marcus could see her hands trembling slightly as she watched her own people attacking the human installation. "This is wrong," she said quietly. "Cathara do not make war like this. We hunt in small groups, fight with honor. This is," she struggled to find the right English word, "coward fighting." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, recognizing the importance of any intelligence about Cathara military doctrine. "My people believe in fair hunting, warrior against warrior, strength against strength, to surround prey like this, to attack when they cannot escape." Zara's voice carried a note of disgust. This is what the hard thinkers do, the ones who say all humans must die quickly before they spread too far. The implications were staggering. If Zara was right, this attack represented a fundamental shift in Cathara strategy. Instead of the honor-based individual combat that had characterized their previous encounters with humans, they were now employing tactics designed for genocide rather than conquest. The hard thinkers, Marcus said. Are they the same ones who wanted to fix your thinking? Zara nodded grimly. They lead the great packs now. They say individual honor is less important than species survival. They say humans breed too fast and adapt too quickly. If they are not stopped soon, they will become too strong to hunt. A brilliant explosion near the base's main gate drew their attention back to the immediate situation. The Cathara assault was intensifying, with multiple groups coordinating their attacks to overwhelm the human defenses. Marcus could see that the base's outer perimeter had already been breached in several places, and the defenders were falling back to secondary positions. "We have to help them," he said, checking his weapons and equipment. "There are good people down there who are going to die if this assault succeeds." "But what can one soldier do against so many?" Sarah asked practically. "And what about the children?" Marcus looked at the three young faces watching him with trust and expectation. Emma and Lucy Henderson, barely 8 years old, who had already lost their father and their home. And Zara, the alien child whose very existence challenged everything both species believed about each other. Getting them to safety was his primary responsibility, but how could he abandon his fellow soldiers when they were facing annihilation? "There might be a way," he said slowly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "But it would be dangerous, and it would require all of us to work together." He activated his tactical display and began outlining a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. The Cathara force surrounding Firebase Bravo was large and well-coordinated, but it was also focused entirely on the human installation. If a small group could approach from an unexpected direction and create a sufficient distraction, it might allow the defenders to break out or at least call for reinforcements. "The Cathara have positioned themselves to contain the base," Marcus explained, "but they've left their rear areas relatively undefended. If we can get close enough to their command position and create enough chaos, we might be able to disrupt their coordination." "How do we get close enough without being detected?" Sarah asked. Marcus turned to Zara. "That's where you come in. You know how your people think and move. You could guide us past their sentries and help us get close to their leaders." The young Cathara's eyes widened with understanding and fear. "You want me to fight against my own people?" "I'm asking you to help save innocent lives," Marcus corrected gently. "Human and Cathara alike. If this attack succeeds, it will escalate the conflict. More soldiers will die, more families will be destroyed, and any chance for peace between our species will be lost." Zara was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with emotions and loyalties that would have challenged an adult. Finally, she spoke in a voice that was small but determined. "The hard thinkers killed my clutch mother and father when I refused the fixing. They said soft thinking could not be allowed to spread. If they win here, they will kill any Cathara who questions their way." She looked up at Marcus with ancient sadness in her young eyes. "I will help you fight them." The next hour was spent in careful preparation. Marcus redistributed his equipment to give each member of their small group what they would need for the mission. Sarah received his backup communicator and emergency beacon, along with instructions for calling for help if something went wrong. Emma and Lucy were given small but powerful flashlights and taught how to use them for signaling. Zara proved to be an invaluable source of intelligence about Cathara tactics and weaknesses. She explained how the alien warriors used their natural night vision and enhanced hearing to coordinate their movements, and how their command structure was organized around the most experienced hunters. "The Pack Alpha will be positioned where he can see the whole battlefield," she explained. "Usually on high ground with the other leaders nearby. If the Alpha is confused or frightened, the whole pack becomes confused." "How do we frighten something that's 3 meters tall and covered in armor scales?" Marcus asked. Zara's expression grew thoughtful. "Cathara fear only a few things, death, of course, but also shame and dishonor. If the Pack Alpha is made to look weak or cowardly in front of his warriors, they may not follow his commands." It was a slim chance, but it was better than trying to fight their way through 60 alien warriors. Marcus finalized his plan, knowing that it depended on timing, luck, and the courage of 3 children who had already endured more than most adults ever would. They began their descent from the ridge, moving carefully through the darkness toward the rear of the Cathara formation. Zara took the lead, using her enhanced senses to guide them around enemy sentries and through gaps in their perimeter. Her knowledge of Cathara movement patterns proved invaluable, allowing them to approach much closer to the alien force than Marcus would have thought possible. As they drew nearer to the battle, the sounds and smells of combat became overwhelming. The acrid scent of burned electronics mixed with the metallic tang of blood and the ozone smell of energy weapons. Occasionally, they could hear human voices shouting orders or calling for medical assistance, reminding Marcus of what was at stake. "There," Zara whispered, pointing toward a rocky outcropping about 500 meters away. "The Pack Alpha watches from that place. I can smell his scent markers." Marcus studied the position through his scope. The outcropping provided an excellent view of Firebase Bravo and was positioned to allow rapid communication with the various assault groups. It was also heavily defended, with at least a dozen Cathara warriors positioned around its base. "How do we get close enough to cause a distraction?" Sarah asked. Marcus checked his equipment one more time, his mind racing through the possibilities. He had grenades, plasma charges, and his rifle, but none of them would create the kind of psychological impact they needed. What they required was something that would shake the Cathara leadership's confidence in their superiority over humans. "Zara," he said suddenly, "do your people have any kind of challenge ritual, something that would force the Pack Alpha to respond personally?" The young alien's eyes lit up with understanding. "The honor call. If a warrior believes a leader has acted without courage, they can call for single combat. The leader must answer or lose face with his pack." "And if I were to issue this challenge? A human challenging a Cathara Alpha?" Zara's voice carried a note of amazement. "It has never been done, but if the challenge was given correctly with the proper words and ceremonies, he would have to answer. To refuse would show that he fears a mere human." It was exactly what Marcus needed. A direct challenge to single combat would force the Cathara leader to step away from his command position and face him personally. During the fight, Sarah and the children could use the distraction to get closer to the base, while Marcus did his best to create as much chaos as possible. "Teach me the words," he said to Zara. The young Cathara spent the next few minutes coaching Marcus in the proper pronunciation and gestures for the honor call. The alien language was complex, with guttural sounds and tonal variations that were difficult for human vocal cords to produce, but Marcus was a quick learner. "Remember," Zara said seriously, "once you give the call, you cannot take it back. The Alpha will fight you to the death, and he will not show mercy because you are smaller or weaker." Marcus nodded grimly. He understood the risks, but he also knew that desperate times called for desperate measures. If his sacrifice could save the lives of his fellow soldiers and get the civilians to safety, it would be worth it. They moved closer to the Cathara command position, using the sounds of battle to mask their approach. Marcus could see the Pack Alpha now, a massive Cathara warrior standing nearly 4 meters tall, his scales marked with intricate patterns that denoted his rank and achievements. The alien leader moved with the fluid grace of an apex predator, issuing commands to his subordinates with gestures and low-pitched vocalizations. "When I give the challenge," Marcus whispered to the others, "you start moving toward the base. Don't look back and don't try to help me. Just get to safety and tell them what Zara has told us about the hard thinkers." Sarah reached out and clasped his hand briefly. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Emma and Lucy each gave him a quick hug, while Zara touched his arm in what he recognized as a gesture of respect among her people. "Fight with honor, Marcus Warrior," she said formally. "Your courage will be remembered." Marcus took a deep breath and stepped out from behind their concealment. Activating his voice amplifier to ensure he could be heard over the sounds of battle, he began the honor call ritual that Zara had taught him. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every Cathara within hearing distance stopped what they were doing and turned to stare at the lone human who had dared to challenge their leader. The Pack Alpha himself seemed frozen with shock, his massive head tilted as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Marcus continued the ritual challenge, his voice growing stronger and more confident as he spoke the ancient words. He demanded single combat with the pack leader, questioned the honor of surrounding and besieging a fortified position, and accused the Alpha of cowardice for hiding behind his warriors while sending others to die. The response was explosive. Roars of outrage rose from the Cathara force as they processed the unprecedented insult. Several warriors started toward Marcus, but the Pack Alpha's commanding bellow stopped them in their tracks. The massive alien leader stepped forward, his eyes blazing with fury and something that might have been respect. When the Alpha spoke, his voice was like rolling thunder, carrying easily across the battlefield. Marcus didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. The challenge had been accepted. The Pack Alpha began moving down from his command position, his warriors forming a rough circle around the area where the combat would take place. Marcus noticed with satisfaction that the Cathara assault on Firebase Bravo had completely stopped as every alien fighter turned their attention to the unprecedented spectacle. As the massive alien warrior approached, Marcus got his first close look at a Cathara Pack Alpha in full battle array. The creature's scales were scarred from countless fights, and his claws gleamed with metal reinforcements that could slice through steel. Most intimidating of all were his eyes, intelligent, calculating, and completely without mercy. The Alpha spoke again, this time in heavily accented but understandable English. "You are brave for a soft skin, but bravery without wisdom is simply another way to die. I will make your death quick in honor of your courage." "I appreciate the gesture," Marcus replied, raising his plasma rifle, "but I'm not planning on dying today." The Cathara leader's response was a sound that might have been laughter. "No one ever plans to die, human, but the strong survive and the weak become food. This is the way of nature." "Maybe," Marcus said, settling into a combat stance, "but sometimes the weak get lucky." The Alpha's charge was blindingly fast, covering the distance between them in seconds. Marcus barely managed to dive aside as massive claws raked through the air where he had been standing. He rolled, came up firing, and put 3 plasma bolts center mass into the alien's chest. The shots that would have killed a human merely staggered the Cathara Alpha, his natural armor and enhanced physiology absorbing most of the damage. The alien warrior roared in pain and fury, but kept coming, his claws whistling through the air as he tried to corner his smaller opponent. Marcus found himself fighting for his life against an opponent who was stronger, faster, and better armed than anything he had ever faced. His only advantages were his human flexibility and his military training, which had taught him to think tactically even under extreme pressure. The battle raged across the rocky ground, with Marcus using every trick he had learned to stay ahead of the Alpha's devastating attacks. He used his rifle's energy cells as improvised grenades, detonating them near the alien's feet to create distractions. He employed the terrain to his advantage, forcing the larger opponent to maneuver awkwardly around obstacles. But gradually, inevitably, the Alpha's superior physical capabilities began to tell. Marcus was bleeding from several minor wounds, and his ammunition was running low. The Cathara leader, though injured, showed no signs of tiring. It was then that Marcus heard something that changed everything, the sound of human voices calling out in their own language. But these weren't the desperate shouts of defenders under siege. These were the confident, coordinated communications of a relief force arriving on the battlefield. The cavalry had arrived. Reinforcements from the main colonial base had detected the attack on Firebase Bravo and were moving to engage the Cathara force. Marcus could see the confusion spreading through the alien ranks as they found themselves caught between 2 human forces. The Pack Alpha noticed it too. For the first time since the combat began, uncertainty flickered in the massive alien's eyes. His assault force was being flanked by fresh human troops, and his warriors were looking to him for orders. But he was trapped in single combat with a human who refused to die easily. It was the moment Marcus had been hoping for. With the Alpha distracted by the tactical situation developing around them, Marcus managed to get inside the alien's guard and deliver a point-blank plasma burst to an unprotected area under the creature's arm. The Alpha staggered, roared in pain, and fell to one knee. Around them, the Cathara force was beginning to waver as human reinforcements pressed their attack. The carefully coordinated assault was dissolving into chaos as individual warriors made their own decisions about whether to fight or flee. The Pack Alpha looked up at Marcus, his eyes now showing something that might have been grudging respect. "You fight well for a soft skin," he growled. "But this changes nothing. My people will return and we will finish what we started here." Maybe, Marcus replied, keeping his rifle trained on the fallen alien. But maybe some of your people are starting to question whether this war is worth fighting. Before the Alpha could respond, Zara stepped out from behind a nearby rock, followed by Sarah, Emma, and Lucy. The young Kithara walked boldly into the circle of watching warriors, her small form dwarfed by the massive adults around her. "I am Zara of the Broken Claw Clutch," she announced in her people's language, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "I speak for those who believe there is another way." The effect on the assembled Kithara was electric. Warriors who had been preparing to resume their assault instead stared in shock at the alien child who had chosen to side with humans. Several of them began speaking rapidly among themselves, their voices carrying notes of confusion and uncertainty. The Pack Alpha struggled to his feet, his eyes fixed on Zara with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Corrupted hatchling," he snarled. "You have been poisoned by soft-skin lies." "No," Zara replied firmly, switching to English so that both species could understand her words. "I have been taught by human cubs that thinking beings can choose cooperation instead of war. That strength comes from protecting others, not just from winning fights." She gestured toward Emma and Lucy, who stood close beside her despite their obvious fear. "These little ones shared their food with me when I was hungry. They gave me warmth when I was cold. They called me sister when I had no family. This is not the behavior of animals without souls." The silence that followed was profound. Human and Kithara warriors alike stared at the unprecedented sight of children from both species standing together in friendship and mutual protection. For a moment, the ancient hatreds and prejudices that had driven their conflict seemed less important than the simple courage of three young beings who had chosen to see past their differences. It was the Pack Alpha who broke the spell, raising his head to roar a command at his warriors. But when he looked around for support, he found that many of his fighters were no longer focused on him. Instead, they were looking at Zara and the human children, their expressions thoughtful rather than hostile. The sound of approaching human vehicles grew louder, and Marcus could see the first of the relief force vehicles cresting the ridge behind them. The tactical situation was rapidly shifting in favor of the humans, but more importantly, something fundamental had changed in the way both species looked at each other. The battle for Firebase Bravo was far from over, but the war itself might never be the same again. The arrival of human reinforcements transformed the battlefield in ways that went far beyond simple military tactics. As armored vehicles crested the ridge and began deploying troops, the carefully orchestrated Kithara assault began to fracture into smaller, disconnected engagements. But the real change was happening in the minds and hearts of the warriors from both species who had witnessed something unprecedented, a moment of genuine understanding between former enemies. Commander Sarah Martinez stepped out of the lead vehicle, her battle-scarred armor reflecting the glow of plasma fire from the ongoing skirmishes around Firebase Bravo. She was a veteran of a dozen colonial conflicts, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for the scene before her. A human soldier stood guard over a wounded Kithara Pack Alpha, while an alien child spoke passionately to a gathering of warriors from both species. "Sergeant Chen," she called out, recognizing Marcus despite his battered condition. "Report." Marcus kept his rifle trained on the fallen Alpha while giving his commander a quick summary of the situation. "The Henderson family was attacked 3 days ago. I found survivors, including the alien child you see there. She's been providing intelligence about Kithara faction disputes and helped us avoid their hunting patrols." Commander Martinez studied the unlikely group with professional interest. "And the Pack Alpha?" "I challenged him to single combat using their honor ritual. The challenge disrupted their command structure long enough for your forces to arrive." "Sergeant," the commander said dryly, "challenging an alien Pack Alpha to single combat wasn't part of your mission parameters." "No, ma'am," Marcus admitted, "but sometimes you have to improvise." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion among the Kithara warriors. Several of them had approached Zara and were speaking rapidly in their own language, their voices carrying tones of urgency and confusion. The young alien responded with remarkable composure for someone her age, gesturing toward the human children and then to Marcus. Sarah Henderson moved protectively closer to all three children, but she needn't have worried. The Kithara warriors who had approached were showing signs of curiosity rather than hostility. One of them, a female with distinctive purple markings on her scales, knelt down to bring herself closer to Zara's eye level. "Small speaker," the female said in heavily accented English. "You claim the soft skins showed you kindness, but they are prey creatures. How can prey show kindness to hunters?" Zara looked up at the massive warrior without fear. "Because they are not prey creatures. They are thinking beings like us. Watch." She turned to Emma and Lucy, speaking to them in the few words of Cathara she had taught them during their time in the cave. The human children responded by approaching the kneeling alien warrior, their small hands reaching out to touch the purple-marked scales. The Cathara female remained perfectly still as the children explored her alien features with the fearless curiosity of youth. "They are not afraid," the warrior observed, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "Fear is taught," Zara replied wisely. "Cubs learn to hate what their parents hate, but they can also learn to love what their parents love. These cubs learned that I was their friend before they learned that I was supposed to be their enemy." The philosophical implications of Zara's words rippled through the assembled warriors. Several more Cathara had abandoned their combat positions to join the growing circle around the children, while human soldiers from the relief force watched in amazement. Commander Martinez found herself witnessing something that military doctrine insisted was impossible: spontaneous communication between enemy forces. The wounded Pack Alpha struggled to regain his feet, his face twisted with fury at what he saw as the corruption of his warriors. "Weakness," he roared in both languages. "You listen to the lies of a broken hatchling and her prey friends. This is why the hard thinkers say all soft skins must die quickly before they can spread their poison." "Maybe," said a new voice, "it's time we listened to something other than the hard thinkers." Everyone turned to see another Cathara approaching from the direction of Firebase Bravo. This alien was older than the others, his scales bearing the intricate scars and markings that denoted high rank and extensive combat experience. But unlike the Pack Alpha's aggressive posture, this newcomer moved with calm deliberation. Marcus raised his weapon, but the alien held up a clawed hand in a gesture of peace. "I am Hunt Leader Kethrak of the Northern Clans," he announced. "I came here tonight to observe this new style of warfare that the hard thinkers have brought to our people." The Pack Alpha's eyes widened with recognition and something that might have been fear. "Hunt Leader, I was not told that the clan leaders were watching this operation." "No," Kethrak replied coldly, "you were not. The hard thinkers wanted to present their methods as a success before the clan council could debate their wisdom. But what I see here is not success, it is chaos and dishonor." The Hunt Leader turned his attention to Zara, studying the young alien with intense interest. "So you are the hatchling who has caused such disruption. Tell me, small one, what makes you believe that Cathara and humans can coexist?" Zara straightened to her full height, which brought her barely to the adult's knee. "Because I have lived with them, Hunt Leader. I have seen them care for their young, protect their weak, and choose cooperation over violence when given the chance. They are no different from us in the things that matter." "But they breed rapidly and expand aggressively," Kethrak pointed out. "Surely this threatens our territorial claims." "There is room for both our peoples on this world," Sarah Henderson interjected, surprising everyone by stepping into the conversation. "We came here to build farms and communities, not to conquer territory. If your people had approached us openly, we could have worked out arrangements for shared land use." The Hunt Leader's massive head tilted as he considered this. "You would negotiate with us as equals, even though we are predators and you are, as you are." "Intelligence is intelligence," Commander Martinez said, joining the conversation. "If you're capable of language, art, and philosophy, then you're capable of diplomacy. The question is whether your people are interested in alternatives to warfare." A murmur ran through the assembled Cathara warriors as they absorbed the implications of the commander's words. The concept of humans viewing them as equals rather than either prey or monsters was clearly new to many of them. The Pack Alpha made one last attempt to reassert control over the situation. "Soft-skin tricks," he snarled. "They seek to weaken us with talk while their reinforcements arrive. We should finish the attack while we still can." But when he looked around for support, he found that most of his warriors were no longer listening to him. Instead, they were engaged in hesitant but genuine conversations with their human counterparts, facilitated by Zara's translation efforts and the universal language of curiosity about each other's cultures. Hunt leader Kethrak observed these interactions with growing interest. "Tell me, human commander," he said to Martinez, "if we were to agree to a temporary ceasefire, would your people be willing to discuss the possibility of formal negotiations?" Commander Martinez felt the weight of history on her shoulders. The decision she made in the next few minutes could either open the door to peace or escalate the conflict to new levels of violence. She looked at the scene around her, human soldiers and alien warriors talking together, children from both species playing despite the language barriers, and the obvious intelligence and dignity of the Cathara leaders. "I would need to contact my superiors," she said carefully, "but I believe the colonial administration would be very interested in exploring peaceful solutions to our territorial disputes. We've seen enough war to know that it benefits no one." "What of the hard thinkers?" the Pack Alpha demanded, his voice carrying a note of desperation. "They will not accept this betrayal of Cathara principles. They will bring greater forces and finish what we started here." Kethrak's expression grew stern. "The hard thinkers have had their chance to prove their methods. Tonight has shown that their approach leads only to chaos and dishonor. Perhaps it is time for the clan councils to consider other options." The hunt leader turned to address the mixed group of humans and Cathara. "I propose that we establish a temporary ceasefire in this sector to last until formal representatives from both our peoples can meet to discuss terms. Those who wish to continue fighting can do so elsewhere, but this ground will be neutral territory." A cheer went up from the human soldiers, while the Cathara warriors expressed their approval through a series of harmonic vocalizations that sounded almost like singing. But the celebration was cut short by the Pack Alpha's roar of fury. "I will not be part of this betrayal," he declared, struggling to his feet despite his injuries. "If you lack the courage to finish what we started, then I will find warriors who do." The wounded Alpha began limping toward the forest, apparently intending to return to Cathara territory and report the night's events to the hard thinker leadership. Several of his most loyal warriors moved to follow him, but hunt leader Kethrak's commanding voice stopped them. "Let him go," the hunt leader said, "but know that any warrior who chooses to follow the path of dishonor will be judged accordingly by the clan councils." As the Pack Alpha disappeared into the darkness, taking perhaps a third of his original force with him, the remaining Cathara and human personnel began working together to establish the impromptu ceasefire. Medical personnel from both species tended to the wounded, while officers worked on communication protocols for maintaining the peace. Marcus found himself standing with Sarah Henderson and the three children, watching in amazement as former enemies began learning each other's names and sharing stories about their families. It was a transformation that no one could have predicted when he set out on his reconnaissance mission just days earlier. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her arm around all three children. "Now we prove that peace is possible," Marcus replied, "and we make sure that what Zara started here doesn't get lost in politics and military bureaucracy." Zara looked up at him with her large, dark eyes. "Do you think the hard thinkers will accept what happened here?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think they'll fight against it, but I also think that what you've accomplished here is bigger than any one faction can stop. You've shown both our peoples that there's another way." Commander Martinez approached their small group, her expression thoughtful. "Sergeant Chen, I'll need detailed reports on everything that happened during your mission. And Mrs. Henderson, the colonial administration will want to interview you about your family's experiences." "And Zara?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying a protective note. "Zara will be treated as a refugee under our protection," the commander assured them. "Her courage and intelligence have earned her that much, but the larger question of her status will need to be worked out through the diplomatic channels we're hopefully about to establish." As the night progressed and the temporary ceasefire took hold, representatives from both species began planning for the formal negotiations that would hopefully follow. Messages were sent to the colonial administration and the Cathara clan councils, requesting permission to explore peaceful solutions to their territorial conflicts. The immediate crisis was over, but everyone involved understood that the real work was just beginning. Generations of mistrust and prejudice couldn't be overcome in a single night, no matter how dramatic the circumstances. There would be setbacks, political opposition from extremists on both sides, and countless practical problems to solve. But something fundamental had changed on the battlefield outside Firebase Bravo. Humans and Cathara had looked into each other's eyes and seen intelligence, dignity, and the possibility of friendship. A young alien child had spoken truth to power and helped her people see beyond their assumptions about human nature. And perhaps most importantly, 3 children, 2 human and 1 Cathara, had formed bonds that transcended species differences, proving that the future didn't have to be defined by the conflicts of the past. As dawn began to break over the contested landscape, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He had gone out to find missing colonists and had returned with something far more valuable, the first real hope for peace between 2 intelligent species who had been locked in unnecessary conflict. The scout had indeed found the cubs, but what he had returned with was something that would change the course of history, the knowledge that they were not alone in wanting something better than endless war. 3 months after the unprecedented events at Firebase Bravo, the landscape of human-Cathara relations had transformed.